Hi, so please make sure you read this question before you start the video. That way this video explanation will make more sense. So the first thing we need to do is start by calculating the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. So this is done at the beginning of the year because we haven't yet incurred all the overhead costs that will happen during the year. But we will need to assign some of these costs to the jobs that will be coming off the line, because these jobs that we're doing need to build in a price that covers the manufacturing overhead rate. All right, so we'll calculate this rate always based on estimates because we don't really know what's going to happen in the future. So if you look down the list, we'll need to pick out what costs will be manufacturing overhead. So direct labor hours, that could be an allocation base, although it isn't in this question. Machine hours, that's the allocation base, or what they're going to use to allocate manufacturing overhead. But it's not a manufacturing overhead cost, so we're not going to worry about it right now. Depreciation on salespeople's autos, well, that has nothing to do with our plant, so that's definitely not manufacturing overhead. Indirect materials, hot dog, there's our first manufacturing overhead thing. So we're going to pop that in, and that is worth $50,000. So if we keep going down the list, depreciation on trucks used to deliver uniforms, nope. Depreciation on plant and equipment, ding, ding, ding. There is another manufacturing overhead, or something that would be considered manufacturing overhead because it has something to do with manufacturing. And it's not direct labor and it's not direct materials. So it's manufacturing overhead. Indirect manufacturing labor. Yes, there's another one. Woo-woo! So, all right, going down the list. Customer service hotline. Nothing to do with manufacturing, so I don't care right now. And plant utilities. Yes, that I do care about for sure. And that's $18,000. Direct labor costs. Well, that will be added to every job, but it's not manufacturing overhead, so we're just not going to worry about it right at this point. So let's total up all of those crazy costs, and we will find that the total is $173,000. So that's what we think we're going to spend in manufacturing overhead during the year. Now we have to figure out a way to put a little bit of that cost together with each job. So the way we're going to do that is we'll take that manufacturing overhead estimate, and machine hours is what it says they use to allocate the cost. So we'll divide it by machine hours. And so when we do that, we'll have our 173,000 estimate divided by the 6,920,000 hours they believe they will run their machine during the year to give us our rate. So 25 bucks. That's what we think we should allocate per machine hour. All right. So, in part 2, we're asked to calculate the allocated manufacturing overhead for the past year. So, this overhead rate that we've just calculated, that is what we're going to use as our base to allocate. So, every time we get a job, we're going to take the actual machine hours and times it by that predetermined overhead rate. So we'll take in total 6,400 hours and times it out by that 25 bucks. So all in all, for the year, we'll allocate $160,000 during the year. Now, notice right off the get-go that we actually did a lot less hours than we thought we were going to do. Yikes. You know, there's no magic crystal balls, and at the beginning of the year, we thought we were gonna do a lot of work, and really we didn't do as much. So, you know, there could be a problem in our estimation right off the get-go, and that's what we're really dealing with in this problem. Okay, so now let's move on to part 3. Part 3, we're asked to compute the under or over allocated manufacturing overhead. How will this under or allocated manufacturing overhead be disposed of? Well, the answer to that disposal is the difference between what we put to the job and what really goes into the account. Well, it goes into cost of goods sold because we're just going to figure it out. You know, all of this stuff, it's part of manufacturing the stuff that we made during the year. And hopefully, most of the stuff we made in the year, we actually sold. So that's where all the costs should end up at the end of the day. All right, so let's see how this really works. So if we're thinking about our manufacturing overhead account, we'll think of all of the actual costs being put into the manufacturing overhead account. Every time we incur, say, our indirect materials, bam, they're going to go in on the debit side of this manufacturing overhead account. So I'm just taking the actual amounts here. So our indirect materials, we budgeted $50,000. We actually used more. The cost was $52,000 during the year. So that's what would have went into the manufacturing overhead account. In our depreciation on plant and equipment, holy smokes, we estimated $65,000. It was actually $67,000. Yikes, this isn't looking good because we're incurring a lot more costs than we originally anticipated. Our indirect manufacturing labor, we thought we were going to use $40,000. It was actually $43,000. And finally, those plant utilities, $20,000 instead of the $18,000 we anticipated. Now, in part 2, we allocated out $160,000 to our jobs. That means, holy cow, more costs were actually incurred than we put to the jobs we associated with each of the jobs we produced. So we ended up under allocating our manufacturing overhead. Not as much went out to the jobs as we really ended up spending. So now all of or most of that stuff is sold. And we need to show that we incurred those costs when we actually made the jobs. So what we're going to do is we need to show all of these costs being associated to the jobs at the end of the day. So we're going to need a credit here in this account. So eventually it balances out to 0, and all of our costs are spread over the things we produced, and so we know actually what we make at the end of the day. So we'll need to put a credit into that manufacturing overhead. So it's 0, all of the costs go to the jobs, and our debit just goes, oops, to our cost of goods sold. So if you think of doing that, cost of goods sold goes up by 22,000 when our manufacturing overhead is underallocated, and that balance just goes away from our manufacturing overhead because we're trying to clear it all out. So there's our journal entry. With our cost of goods sold going up in this journal entry, the gross profit we've made on all of those jobs would go down. Cost of goods sold is a manufacturing and a retailer's biggest expense. Part 4, how can managers use accounting information to help control manufacturing overhead costs? Well, we used a whole bunch of budgeted information. And budgets are just our plans put down in financial terms. But if our planning is really off, we have to find the roots of those problems. Because if we're bad planners, we're going to be bad managers. So we're going to want to figure out why we have those big differences between what we planned and what actually happened, and then correct them. Hope this helps. Bye now.